Aloha, everyone. I think we're live. I do my classic making sure it is live on the main stage for you all, and it is. I see it. All right, so welcome, everyone. My name is Kapehe. You can call me Cap. I do developer relations at Sanity, and I live in Las Vegas, Nevada. So thank you so much for joining. As you come in, you will see on the right that the chat is not in, wow, it has been disabled. So if you want to find the chat where we're all hanging out, you can go to slack.sanity.io and you can find us in the hashtag Meetup channel. So we have found that it actually is really fun to do it here because then you can do like threads and emojis and GIFs and things that the YouTube chat does not have. And so head on over to slack.sanity.io and find us in the Meetup channel. You'll find a lot of the DevRels there and Sanity employees. The speakers from today will also be there. So yeah, let us know where you're joining in from, what time it is for you. I know some of you are joining at really late or really early hours. So thank you for being here. So as you come into that channel, I want to direct you to the code of conduct that is bookmarked at the top of it. So this will just provide expectations for the community and communication between us. And it is important that we are kind and that we make it an inviting environment for everyone. So be sure to check that out. Also, big announcement. We have a new program running by the DevRels, specifically Lo and Hida. One of our speakers is Hida today, but it is the ambassador program. And so we are seeking community members who want to be more involved in the Sanity community, whether it's engaging on threads, whether it's talking about getting started or more like experimental stuff with Sanity, or creating content based on Sanity, whatever it is, however you want to contribute, we do have that ambassador program up and running. And it's pretty new, like this week or within the week it was released, but super, super new. We're getting applications. If you know of someone who is interested in doing that, or if you are interested yourself, reach out to devrel@sanity.io. That is the email that you can email. And we will get you all hooked up with the application. But yeah, definitely, if you're interested or if you know of someone, let us know. And yeah, we're excited to be working with you all. So let me cover the agenda real quick for today. So we have Surjit, who is going to be talking about the perfect Jamstack for your apps. So I know what it is, but I won't tell you all what it is. It's very, very exciting. And then after that, we'll have Vincent, and Vincent is going to be talking about WordPress to Sanity. So Vincent's very familiar with that from moving from WordPress to Sanity. So we will have Vincent on stage. Then after that, we have Hida, who is a DevRel at Sanity, and Hida will be speaking on accessibility. And then after that, this was a last minute ad. But after that, we have Espin, one of our principal engineers, will be speaking, will be demoing one of the newest features to our new Studio V3. The V3 is still in developer preview. We are looking for like feedback and stuff with that, and I can get a link to the GitHub conversation place that we want to have you give us feedback at. But we're jam-packed full of great talks, so we're super excited. Let me actually get our first speaker on stage. It is going to be Surjit. So one second, let me bring Surjit on. Hi, Surjit.
Hi.
How
Cap.
are you?
I'm good.
Right on.
How
And
are
where are
you?
you joining from?
I'm joining from India.
And what time is it for you? It must be really late.
It's 10:30 p.m. right now.
Well, thank you for speaking at such a late hour for you, but
Yeah,
we're very excited to hear your talk. And
sure.
yes, so I will let you have the stage. So this talk is, like I said, going to be on Jamstack and the perfect stack for your applications. So I will
Yeah.
leave you to it, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this Sanity virtual meetup for July uh, 2022. Today I'm going to talk about perfect stack for a Jamstack project. So let's start. Okay, okay. So, who am I? So, I'm basically a UX designer and front-end developer from India. I'm also the founder of Web3 Creative, a Jamstack web development agency. Um, so you can find me on Twitter at surjitctly, and here is me wearing this brand new Sanity hoodie. You can see that. So let's start. Just a minute. Okay. Okay. So my perfect stack is Next.js, Tailwind CSS, and Sanity CMS. I think these three are the perfect stack for Jamstack. So this quote is said nobody but just me because I think this is the perfect stack. And in this talk, I will tell you why this is the perfect stack for your Jamstack project. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about Next.js and Tailwind CSS and Sanity CMS. And finally, we will see some live examples I have made with Sanity. So let's start with Next.js. Next.js is the godsend, or we can say it's a vessel-made React framework for modern era. Like it's a Next.js is simply a static site generator for React, but this is the best static site generator overall. Like we have a lot of other static site generator like Eleventy or Gatsby, but I think Next.js is the best. So it's easy to create static websites or even complex applications. I have not made any such complex applications, but mainly front-end websites has been very easy with Next.js. Like as a fun fact, you can see I created my first Next.js website even without knowing React. Yeah, that's true because it's that easy to learn Next.js even before React. So I just wanted to try it, and at that time I didn't even know anything React, but I just simply tested Next.js with their docs and few tutorials, and it was really easy to work with that. So why Next.js? So I think Next.js is simply a static site generator. So you might be already aware that if it's a static site generator means once you build, it will just be a static files, just like like our good olden days, just static HTML files. It will be all of your content and everything. So because of that, it's very fast and it's SEO friendly. Usually React apps lack this content, like it will be just a root file and everything will be populated on the runtime. So it will be very hard for SEO. But for in the Next.js case, it will be all content will be pre-built and thus it will be SEO friendly. And another good thing about Next.js is like when coming from the good HTML days, like we usually uh, develop HTML, like we will name things like index.html, contact.html. Like if you want a subfolder, like you will create a folder called services, and then inside the services folder you can add services one, two, three, like that. The same method is followed in Next.js, which makes really easy to work with that. Like they have a pages folder. Inside that you can just name it and structure it whatever you want, and the routing will be automatically. Like if you um, choose slash contact or slash about, it should work everything as expected. So that's one good thing about Next.js. And then the best thing about Next.js is this incremental static regeneration. So usual problem with static site generator is once you build a static website, uh, it's like a dead zone because you cannot do anything. Like your content can be changed, but this static build is it's not connected to our data. Even if it's connected to our data, it's only run on the build time. So whenever data changes, this become obsolete. So Next.js come with an interesting solution called incremental static regeneration. So it's not too complex. Even the name little bit long. It's very simple. I will show you in the next slide, like this. So this is the basic data fetching in Next.js. As you can see here, the revalidate option, this is the incremental static regeneration. By just using this revalidate props, the Next.js will automatically fetch new data whenever our Sanity backend changes. Now, revalidated 10 means it will just check for new updates every 10 seconds. So that is it's very easy. Like you can see the query. There is a query for getting the post, and this is just a get static props function from um, Next.js, and you will just get a get the post from the Sanity client, and then just return the props. Along with that, you just add this revalidate. That's it. So another good thing about Next.js is its inbuilt image optimization. Like we have a 5 MB image, and if you try to load in our website, it will be very slow. But using this image tag in Next.js, it will be very minimal. Like if you're opening on a tab or a mobile, the screen, the size of the image will adjust based on that. But one problem with Sanity is it won't work directly with Sanity. So even though it works with normal images, there is a bit changes we need to do with the Sanity images. For that, I think this package is a great package, like by Bundle and Batches Next Sanity Image. This is a great plugin for Sanity. Mm, this makes this image optimization of Next.js as is the same method. Like it will be on less on your server on load, and so I'm using this plugin on every project I'm doing. I cannot do any project without this plugin because it's so much cool. So thank you for that. So then why we should choose Next.js is mainly because of its community. Uh, like if I have a doubt about Next.js, I don't have to check for the React devs. I can check for React community. Like uh, even if it's Next.js, it's based on React, right? So React has a big community. Like even Next.js has a big community right now. Even if I have any problems, if I want any solutions, so this community is really great and is backed by Vercel. So Vercel and hosting is completely easy. Like previously, I was used some other hosting, but while using Next.js, Vercel makes it really easy. I just don't want to do anything. So just I will git push and Vercel handles everything in the backend. So it's just one hassle out of from my mind. It's just over. I just git push and the site is live. So that's is the another reason to choose Next.js. So now coming to the next main thing is the CSS. So I choose Tailwind CSS. So Tailwind CSS is the most criticized CSS framework in the world. Yes, either you will be loving Tailwind CSS or you will be hating it. So these are the two people right now. Either you will hate it or you will love it. So I was a Bootstrap user for years. I was making website with Bootstrap. Then I started using Tailwind CSS for a personal project. Ever since then, for every new project, I have used Tailwind CSS. It's the best. So why is it best? I will just show you. So Tailwind CSS. So if you don't know what is Tailwind CSS is, it's just a set of utility-based class names. So what is utility-based class names? Like this. So here is a sample code developed with Tailwind CSS. As you can see, we have this P6, Max, W, SM, MX, Auto. These are the utility classes. So each utility class have this their own style. Like for this means it's a padding of 6, and this is margin auto, like background white. This is for the border radius, shadow, flex. Everything will be a little utility. So we can keep on adding these class names like this, and you have a Tailwind website. So because of its utility-based CSS, we literally no need to write custom classes, because usually we write classes, CSS custom CSS classes for a widget. Like we will add a display flags and a margin, background color. We will give everything into a container or like that. But when using Tailwind CSS, there is no need to write, because everything is utility based. Like you can see, you can add everything to the, like if it's a heading or it's a paragraph, you can just add the utility class. Then you no need to touch the uh, CSS file. So also one good thing is using Tailwind CSS is we don't need to find a good class names. Like it's actually a mental strain for me to find a good class names for each widget. Like if this was a widget, like I have to write it as chit chat widget or something like that. So finding that kind of name is really hard. But coming to Tailwind CSS, there is no worry. Tailwind CSS also works with responsive hover states, and there are much more than that, not just utility classes. It's a mature CSS framework with a lot of features. I'm not going too much detail here. You can check their docs. It's super easy to read, super easy to understand. So, like for responsive classes, you have these variants like MD hidden or SM hidden, something like that. And for hover states, we have this hover colon and text green 500, something like that. And for focus, and there are a dark mode, and there are a lot of features in Tailwind CSS you can use. And you think there are a lot of utility classes, so it will be very big file size. It's not. Actually, unused CSS are purged even in the development mode. Like even if you are developing on an XJS website, the Tailwind CSS file size will be very small. So each save, they will purge unused CSS from the source. So even in the production, it will be just less than 10 KB, and even in development mode, it will be same. Like thanks to their new JIT engine, so it will automatically purge all unused files. So if like we have padding 4 and padding 6 and padding 8, like you only using padding 8, the output CSS will only contain the padding 8. So that's one of the other benefit of Tailwind CSS. And one problem people say about Tailwind CSS is the reusability problem. Like it's an inline style. If you write a button, like there are 10 classes, and if you have two buttons like that or five buttons, you have to repeat the same classes. And if I have to modify any one button, uh, then we have to change all of these classes on all of these instances. So Tailwind CSS recommends a different way, like a component way. Even in Next.js or any kind of framework, you can use the power of component with Tailwind CSS. So I will just show you how. If the component way is not possible, there is another method, like it's called apply. So if you want a button, you can just create a new class like dot button, and then inside you can just apply any Tailwind CSS classes. You can check the docs for more details about that. So let me show you an example of a component based design and how you can do maintainable Tailwind CSS project. So in our example app, here we have an app, and here we are returning two buttons like getting started and documentation. So this button is made as a component here. Like in this button, you are returning the props for children and all the Tailwind CSS classes here. Then we can reuse on any place in our app, and so it will be the same on every page. And once you need any changes, or if you need any changes, you can just go back to your button instance and just change one place, and it will be affected in all places we want. Like you can use the, if it's a React or Vue, like you can use their own props functionality to add more features like button style. You can change some features, and you can adjust from in one place, so it will be one source of truth. That's how you maintain a big project. So for smaller project, it won't be a big deal. So once your project scales, this method will make you mm, a maintainable project with Tailwind CSS. So another main cool thing about Tailwind CSS is it's not just the basic. It's not just basic style set of styles they provide. We have to use that. There is no kind of restrictions like that. We can extend it, tweak it, change it, whatever we need to do, you can do, and we can create our own design system using the tailwind.config.js file. So here is an example of such a tailwind.config.js file. Like here you can see it's the basic font family, the basic color is changed here. So we can make our own design tokens like this, and then we can reuse based on this component method I said earlier. So it's the best way. So that's it about the Tailwind CSS. Now coming to Sanity CMS. So I don't have anything to say with Sanity CMS because it's the best headless CMS ever. So if you're watching this stream, you already know why it is the best. So I don't need to explain this. So for me, the Sanity is mainly because of the developer experience we get, and same for the customer experience. The customer will get a simplified interface for adding their content, and as a developer we get full customization options for the CMS. So that's how Sanity is the best choice for Jamstack. So let's show some live demo. Like I will show you some projects I have made with Sanity, Tailwind CSS, and Next.js. So let me take one example. So this is a simple blog starter template I have made with this stack. So it's called Tableau. There is nothing much. It's very simple. Like we have a home page containing all the blog posts, and once you click it, oh, here is the content. That's it. So in the backend, you can just see it's all the posts. You can just click on that. I will just show you all the basic Slack. Everything is just a basic thing. And we also have this site config to set the title, URL, and this logo and basic stuff like that. So I will just show you the code just quickly. Yep. So I have opened the VS Studio Code, and I have this studio inside my project folder like this. Inside, I write all the schemas like this for the other schema, everything like this. So coming to the front end, so in this Next.js, I have this main index.js file. Here I have used the same get static props method I have told you earlier. Like I'm just getting the post config from Sanity, and I'm using that to return the props, and then revalidate it using 10 seconds for the incremental static regeneration. And from the front end, I'm just also using a preview subscription. So for live preview for the content editors, and here I'm just checking if the post and site config is available. I will just render the layout, and inside that I will just render the post. So that's how this is built. And this is an open source template. Like you can go to github.com/web3templates.com/stablo. This is an open source template starter, so you can just scroll down and click on this big blue button to install it, and if you want you can just check it yourself. So then let's quickly jump on to the next example. I'm not sure if I am out of time, but I'll just quickly to this next example. This is a little bit complex one. This is I did for a client. It's based on solar project. So, and this website is entirely built in Sanity, Tailwind, and Next.js. So I'm going to open the backend. Okay. So in this website, I have made all pages as dynamic for the content editors. Like you can see, it's just basically 3 pages here, but they can literally make hundreds of pages using Sanity and without the interruption, without my interruptions. Like I have made the page sections like an array. Like I like the content editor can add any items here, like a lot of sections I have made like this. They can choose any sections and create their own template, create their own page, and then they will go to the menu and they can add the menu, and then finally inside config they can add it to the main navigation. I'm not making any live changes here because it's a live website of my client, so that's how it works. So let's check the code as well. So this is the code for the Sun Energy Solar website. So here, the same way I have the schemas, everything, every object I have added like this, and then in front end, like I have this only one file, this slug file. From this, uh, it works with every page, any page the content editor creates automatically. It should automatically work. So basically it's doing the same thing and little bit extra. So I'll just show you the static props like this, and it will just get the product, and it is the config, the site config, preview, everything like that. And then in the front end, you can see one sections called this one. So I will just show you here in components. I have made all these sections like this. It's hero, gallery, form, FAQ, all sections are here. And then I just import every sections, and then I will just do a resolve sections here to match what content editor choose on any of this page. Like if it's a home page, I will just look for this each section name, like this is going to be hero and intro, three core features, like that. So here, if you scroll down, yep. So once the page and the config is ready, I will just do a map on the content section, and then for each section, I'm just resolving the section to section here and with all the props for that particular section. So this will probably render each section one by one by one. So this makes this page really easy maintainable. Like you can literally add any pages. So only you need to make the components for the client. So if they need a new section, you may just try to create a new section from here, and then they can create many pages, and they can put the same section any page on any page, home page, everywhere. So that's about the uh, sun energy, and I will just show you one more template quickly. So this is the sandbox template. This is also an open source template I have made with Sanity and Next.js. So this is just a basic template for creating documentation. This is also mainly same as the blog. I'll just show you the code for that as well, so you can just see everything. So typography, these are like custom custom tables. These all managed in Sanity itself. So let me quickly open this. I'll just schematize this. You can see site config, category, and the block content. And for the front end, it's just same. You just add all the components like alert, anchor, and everything here. And in the docs, you have this like this. Now just get the post and everything and just render. It's basically simple. Like you can see how the class names using the Tailwind CSS and all the components, like I can do some crazy stuff like this. So it's really maintainable like this. So even these are Tailwind CSS classes. Using the React, I can just change the props like props of type, props of theme, pop stock text, everything. It will be maintainable and it will be easy, and everything will be Tailwind CSS. So that's it. So that's the perfect stack for Jamstack. Uh, so thank you so much for watching this talk. You can always reach me on Twitter at surjitctly. So back to Cap.
I was muted. Right on. Yes, thank you so much. I'm actually going to put your Twitter in the chat. All right, so I've put your Twitter in the chat. Anyone who
Okay.
has questions that we don't answer right now, you can definitely find search it there. Also in the community. Everyone's tagging you in the community, so you can see that all there. So a
Okay,
couple of
cool.
things. So you said at the beginning, well, you said at the Tailwind part that you either love Tailwind or you don't. And I remember I used
Yes,
to be on the I don't because it looked confusing to me. I was like, okay, like MX, MD, what is all this? Like, this doesn't make sense to me. And
correct.
you got to practice. You got to practice, practice, practice. And once those like class names click for you and once you use them enough, it's
Yeah.
I'm now on the side that loves Tailwind. So I'm a huge Tailwind fan. So kudos to
Yeah,
this.
like once you keep using the Tailwind classes, there is no going back. Like they also provide a VS Code in IntelliSense options. So once you type M, it will show all the margins. So we just don't need to remember it. You can just scroll through and just click one of the options. That is a good one. So
Yeah.
once you start using that, it will be very easy.
Yeah. And then somebody had a question. Martin actually had a question. I'm on the fence about
Mhm.
Tailwind because when I see a lot of the benefits, because while I
Mhm.
see a lot of the benefits, I think the class name spaghetti makes my code very hard to parse. Do you have any
Mhm.
tricks and or tips on how to keep the markup human readable? So it's kind of like a follow-up to what we were just talking about.
The final output will be really messy actually. This is going to be, by the way, currently nobody reads the final code, right? Like even if you check some JavaScript code, it will be some gibberish, so nobody going to read that. So in basically you have to use the component method in the source code, so that way whenever you're opening source code, it will be easier for you. Like I have shown in the example, it will be just a button. So in case you want to edit the button, you can just go to that component of button and just make that changes. So
Mhm.
that way it will be simple in the front end.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Um, and then do you think that this stack would be good for a beginner? Like, do you think someone who's just getting into code, would you think Next, Tailwind, and Sanity would be a good stack for them to start with?
Yes, I think they have to be a little bit of effort is there, but
Hmm.
definitely when going forward, this will be a great stack to get started with. Even I have written a blog post using all these stacks, how to get started with Sanity
Hmm.
and this Tailwind and Next.js. Uh, it's actually good to start with. Even I started Next.js without learning React,
Mm.
so it was really easy to learn for me without knowing React. So I have the only basic JavaScript background, even not much big, only little bit jQuery, JavaScript, that kind of
Hmm.
experience. But it was really easy to pick up the Next.js. Even I didn't read the full React docs yet. I only follow Next.js because it's really easy.
Oh, that's interesting. That's good to know. Because, yeah,
Yeah,
you'd think,
yeah.
oh, I have to know React before I can get to Next.
Mhm.
But, yeah, that's
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah, it's good, but there is definitely no need to know React. So basic knowledge is always good.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, there's a lot of clapping and a lot of love in the Meetup channel if you want to go check that out.
Okay.
But thank you so
Yeah.
much for speaking. And I agree. This is probably the perfect stack for projects. So, yeah, great job. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we will see you around.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Bye bye. So it's been late. I have to go to sleep right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Good night. Right on. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So, if you joined late, let me put this banner back up. The chat is not happening, if you see on the right, is not happening in YouTube. It is happening at slack.sanity.io in #meetup. That was a really great talk. Super exciting. We have all this recorded. So if you came in halfway or you want to see it again, it will be on our YouTube channel. So up next, we have Vincent. Let's bring Vincent on stage. Hi, Vincent.
Hey there. Hi, Kabe. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm well. I want to give props to Surjit because those are the kinds of things that I've heard probably 100 explanations of over the past year, and that might be one of the best ones I've heard so far.
Oh, that's amazing. Serge, if you're listening, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, okay, so you are talking about WordPress to Sanity,
Yes.
the journey. Um, I will give the stage to you again. Everyone in the chat, in the #meetup channel, if you have questions, put them there for Vincent, and we will have the Q&A right after. But yeah, the stage is yours. Thank you, Vincent.
All right. There. Hi. Yeah. My name is Vincent Florio, and I'm going to talk to you today about my journey from becoming primarily a WordPress developer over the past 10 years into having a project that came across our path that was kind of reflexively just going to be yet another WordPress project. But for me personally, over the past year, I've been exposed to a lot of the new Jamstack, headless CMS, that kind of stuff. And what put you in my headspace that led me to the reasoning to adopt Sanity as kind of a trial, and why we think it worked out well, like the reasoning process we went through and how validated we feel with that choice. The first thing I want to get out of the way, though, is I actually still really like WordPress. I think it's an incredible accomplishment. I think that it's had 20 years to be built up over time. The same people that are on the core development team are users themselves. So if there's bug fixes, feature requests, all that kind of stuff, it's generated by its own community. So there's a lot that goes into it. It's tended to. I also think my background is in art, in character animation, and so I'm not like a programmer. And so just like PHP, the language that WordPress is built in, I personally feel like it has a fairly low barrier to entry if you're trying to enter a development space. And there's certain characterization that I could do of WordPress that helps that, which is WordPress has a ton of wrapper functions. And I know there's a variety of levels of experience for people that might be watching this. So if you're not familiar, a wrapper function is basically going to consolidate on low-level code to build a function that is like a go-to ready-made thing that you don't have to reinvent the wheel for the kind of tasks that you frequently would want to do yourself. WordPress is incredible at that. Also, if you're looking at some of the source of these wrapper functions, they themselves contain wrapper functions. And there's so many use cases that you think, well, can I do this and grab this by this piece, that kind of stuff, that it's very accommodating in that regard. But as nice as the theory is of WordPress, in practice, in modern years, it's kind of become a disruptive experience. And there's a couple major reasons for that in my professional experience. One of those is a lot of times if you're going into a WordPress site, people have themes that I call off the shelf, which is there is this marketplace, and the marketplace is selling a theme that the people who made that theme so that you had something ready to go, put all kinds of time and all kinds of money into making it. To recoup those costs, they want as many people as possible to think that their theme is a good idea. These marketplaces, it's not like, there are screens of quality to get in there. So it's not like it's bad code or anything like that. What you're going to get there is well constructed. But because they're trying to catch as many views as possible so that you only pay $40, $50, $60 for your instance, you might only need like 2 things out of there and get 20 other ones. So for you, it's like, all the things that all those other people liked, that maybe they like those 2 and those 2 and those 2. It's noisy, it's confusing. I don't know what that noise was. It's sometimes less performant. Just the amount of bloat can be a problem. Also, I remember like 5 and 6 years ago when the page builder started to come out, how wonderful it was, because I can make a blog from scratch, going and looping through information, figuring out how pagination works. But I remember vividly the day where I was like, oh, I'm just going to drop this in, and poof, a widget became a blog. That's amazing. Not only is it nicer for me to just build that, but everybody's going to be really excited that it's going to take me 15 minutes instead of a couple hours. But again, you have to realize that these sorts of plugins, as well made as they are, WordPress is extremely popular. I think still 30-40% of all sites. So there's seemingly infinitely variable hosting environments that it can find itself on. So there's going to be bugs that crop up. And so, how you talk about like, oh, well, that sounds really good in my head. It sounded good in my head, and when I tried to translate it, that's just like a life advice thing. With page builders, it's one of those things. If I'm constructing something, as easy it is to make the thing, if something gets in the way of me making it because there's a bug that crops up or something I don't understand because of hosting hijinks or bugginess from other plugins kind of interplaying, it's a bottleneck. I want to just get to keep the progress that I've made and not have stuff come up all the time. And the core editing experience in WordPress now is Gutenberg. And I would say that's a boon too, in the sense that just like you have the actual design being able to be templated out, that the individual, like inside a post or page, that experience can be crafted for a regular person who's not comfortable with HTML, who just says, well, how do I get 2 pictures side by side? That's way more accessible now. But with regard to what we're going to talk about in a second, It's still just a visual presentation. I'm making something in Gutenberg. It knows it's a heading, but the kind of intrinsic or inherent meaning of that content is still not there. So I'm going to give you a little tiny story that's going to inform where we go in a second. About a year ago, I was working with my friends. The company is called Future Friends, but they're actually my friends, in St. Augustine, Florida. And they had a client that was asking them to create a dashboard. They didn't want it to connect to anything, but I still had to make it like function, like, oh, click this, something explodes or whatever. And it was freeing. It was really freeing because I could just, it's mostly HTML and JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript at that. So if I did something, nothing fought me, nothing resisted. I just got to keep the work that I did. But being flat files, it's not templated in any way. I couldn't say, like, especially when it's a dashboard, you're reusing most of the stuff, like the interface and all that. So it kind of threw into sharper relief that I was feeling, if I wanted to replace something like WordPress in my heart of hearts, then it was going to need to be that easy to, just make it purpose built. But, I still needed what I had before, which is the templating. So I thought, I'm going to make my own CSS, which is a fool's errand if anybody tells you otherwise. But of course, they spent 20 years making WordPress. I wasn't going to replace it overnight. So my thought was, oh, I'll just do little tiny, like, purpose-built ones. Someone only needs a couple features. It's only going to be able to do that. And my evil scheme was, if enough people want those couple features, I'll staple them all together. Then I'll have something a little bit more robust. But it still needs the ability to store something someplace. So I know that Supabase is very quality. It's a Postgres database that I could store stuff remotely there. And I am comfortable enough with JavaScript that I thought, oh, I was just learning about Next just in the past year. It hasn't even been a full year. But knowing that it's kind of like the front end and back ends, that was really attractive to me. But again, with respect to where we're going in a second, Supabase is a relational database, so you are forcing connections to happen, and so it's connected in that way. But the inherent meaning of the content, how it reflects and models the real world, is missing. So the actual project that I'm tending to talk to you about today was something that happened in January, but all that was just explained, like I said, in my headspace. The National Indian Health Board had a series of websites built in WordPress, and we thought about making them another one for their main site, because their main site, the crux of the main site is it acts as a hub for the other ones, but it's a lot older, and it's just PHP files. And they have, just to give you a quick example, if there's a piece of news, like a post, it needs to be repurposed in a couple different spots. So if you're using FTP to do that, you're literally going, okay, I wrote it out in HTML. I'm going to go to the other place it needs to be. Like, let's say it's about a law that got passed, and put this on the legislative alerts page. So the ask was relatively simple. They said, can you make us something where we only have to add it in one spot, and then everywhere we need to consume it, like a feed, we can just do it from there. And as I was kind of plotting it in my head, I thought about the REST API, and the REST API is kind of like what Sanity is doing with their API, in the sense that there are endpoints where you can kind of fetch information from the core software. But there's a laundry list of stuff that makes it untenable, at least for when we were trying it. So authentication, you have to authenticate to protect the information with the WordPress REST API. And the strongest thing is a community plugin, which there's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just, in our experience and practice, it was not something consistent and reliable, and we needed something that worked for us every time. When you make a request to the WordPress API, WordPress REST API, you get everything. So if you ask for a post, it's everything you ever possibly want to know about the post, even if it's something that doesn't have anything to do with the content, and then it's your responsibility to kind of pare that down. If you have a piece of information you're looking for that connects to it, like, I need to know about this first to go get the other thing, you're making multiple passes, which is, I want to say disruptive, but it's more work. By default, you have a limit to how much you can fetch. Like, we're used to, if you've used Sanity, just saying, hey, give me that, and as many as it takes, you get that back. Otherwise, you can define how much you want. And then there's also a strong enforcement of pagination with WordPress using the REST API. And we wanted a little bit more freedom than that. But perhaps the most disruptive, and this is another thing, like the theory versus practice, most of the hosting environments, they don't expect anything on the REST API to change that much, so they cache it for hours at a time. At the NAHB site, there is a lot of time-sensitive or urgent information. So if someone's like, oh, we'll get that out the door, and you have to wait an hour for anybody to see it, that's a problem. So I think it's interesting that Surjit had mentioned it too. When I was looking at Jamstack alternatives or headless CMS alternatives, a lot of them were very developer focused. Things were very technical and hard to parse. And I couldn't imagine a regular person jumping in to some of them. And yet the split with Sanity that's wonderful is I know enough about development that if I'm doing development things, it allows me to do that with total freedom. It makes my life easier. The experience is a good one. But also what I've constructed with my experience is something that an editor doesn't know behind the scenes. Like, they can't see the scenes. They just get something that is straight to the point. If they ask for something and I make it using Sanity, in 10 minutes I can teach them how to use it because it's what they asked for and nothing else. No bloat, nothing like that. And also the API at Sanity, when you're consuming it, unlike the rest one in our experience, is self-flushing and self-caching. But perhaps the biggest win is structured content and how Sanity supports it. I didn't even know that was a thing up until this past year. I'm going to steal a quote from one of the guide pages on the Sanity website from Carrie Hain, who, as you can see, is head of content strategy relations, because it's such a good way to say it. It makes a lot of sense. The emphasis is mine. It says structured content is content broken into its smallest reasonable pieces, which are explicitly organized and classified to be understandable by computers and humans. And I think that last part is perhaps the most important. So how does it relate to the studio that we made for NAHB? Well, I have a couple document types that I want to walk you through quick that I think are strong examples of that. One is a position in the sense of like a job position or a position one holds. And the other is staff members, basically the people that are involved. And one of the things that I like that helps me to think about how structured content works, and especially with respect to Sanity, is kind of the remixing or recipes metaphor. I'll give you an example of that. If they have a contact page, I can go through each career department, which is itself a document type. And for those, I'll go in all the positions in my code to reference all those fields and look for the toggle where it's held or not, which I think is actually still in the screenshot back here. The position is open. And then for all of those that are held, in other words, they're toggled off because they're not open because someone's filling them, there is a staff member assigned. When you find that person, go grab their phone number and their email. And just as I've indicated too, if there's a lot of times like with the WordPress site, if you have contact information on a bunch of pages, that changes. You got to go find every other place that you put that. Whereas if it's all sourcing from one spot, like Insanity, and their contact information does change quite a bit, I just have to hit the one spot. And then again, everywhere that consumes that updates automatically, usually in seconds. As opposed to the career opportunities page, which is taking the same kinds of information, but just taking only what's contextually relevant. So in this case, we're just looking for the open positions that no one is in. And because they're not in them, we can give them the description to people that might be wanting to apply and the file storage that we're allowed here for the PDF for the application. So I wrote these down. I think it's really important when you're thinking about not only producing the content, but the how it's modeled out. You're giving everything that you want to possibly know about a subject, but it's just cherry picking. Like on a case-by-case basis, it is distinct from the presentation because you can make the presentation out of anything. And when you're doing querying for data in Sanity, it is literally just give me exactly what I asked for, nothing more, which is wonderful because I can mirror on the front end the queries that I'm doing. I can say, just give me these pieces, and my code basically looks like filling in the blanks like a Mad Lib. So when I think about how I tried to validate my decisions, like I mentioned earlier. I think about working backwards in math to kind of check your answer. So I want to think out loud with you all about what this might have looked like if we did commit to it in WordPress. And presumably we're going to take the document types that we did in Sanity, and they would have had to be post types. But if I did custom fields beyond just, phone numbers, emails, that kind of stuff, when I go to, for example, associate a job position with a person, it's just going to be plain text. It has to be. There's no other way to connect to it. There are enough tools in WordPress where you could kind of hook in and see, okay, go find all the job positions, just so I have like a drop-down list, so I don't have to retype or guess at what they are. But even there, it's literally just a label. I could pattern match and say, using this information, go connect to that and give me some stuff. But then you're back to, okay, well, I'm getting all the things, and then I got to go and whittle it back down again. So in summary, I think we made the right decision. And for me, at least, moving forward, I think just like is apparent in the alphabet, S is always going to come before W. So thank you. That's it, I think. Is the sound? Hold on.
I'm muted. I'm sorry. That was me. Can you hear me now?
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I can hear you now. Sorry, I thought you were muted again.
I was muted. That's my bad. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
It's like I've never done this before. But yeah, great talk. Thank you so much. There's a lot of love in the Meetup channel if you want to go check that out.
Sure.
A lot of people are saying, flashback to my WordPress days. But yeah, the make my own CMS thought that you had. I've heard a lot of developers say that. Well, I'll just make my own CMS. It sounds like you're happy you did not make your own. Are you like?
Oh yeah,
back,
actually,
historically,
I've said a couple of times. I kind of repeat myself a lot in the Slack forums. Is Sanity, and this is me taking way too much credit because I'm not saying I could, is the thing that I would build if I could build things like that. Because it follows the way that my brain works, and it's deceptive how much it can do while still appearing like it's really simple. So you see something that is really straightforward, even though it does amazing things under the hood. It's comforting knowing that it can accommodate whatever it is that I happen to imagine.
That's really cool feedback. Thank you for saying that. So we have a question from Martin in the chat. Is there one or several specific features from working in WordPress that you miss in your current workflow? And could a feature be missing in Sanity or in the front ends you work with, or both?
Boy, that's an amazing question. Off the top of my head, honestly, no. I think this isn't a reflection on Martin. The internet has this tendency to compare one thing to the exclusion of the other. I like them both. It's just I get a little bit more with Sanity in a way that makes more sense to me. Just like people have like competing page builder ideas, it's like, hey man, whatever gets you happy and getting your work done, right? So no, I don't think that there's anything I particularly miss about WordPress, but not because it's horrible. It's just because I get the same exact stuff here and then extra stuff.
Yeah, right on. Well, thank you. There weren't very many other questions. I guess I'll ask this question, but has any tool solved the problem of non-developers adding content to websites, but still giving a flexibility to them, but they should never pollute the HTML?
That's actually a really interesting point. I was just thinking to myself, I happened to be thinking to myself this week as people were talking, I think it was you actually that posted something in the Slack forums about, hey, like, what is it that won you over? And see a couple of responses, I think myself included, I don't remember my own life, about the schema setup and like just putting fields into existence like that. Because one of the things that's nice is it's so hard for a regular person to touch your stuff as the developer. Whereas there's a lot of pathways and opportunities in WordPress for them to do so innocuously, but still disruptive. And so everybody gets their own kind of special fields to play in a separate space without anybody feeling like they're missing out on anything. So I think it's that was kind of abstracting those two worlds is actually very helpful.
Yeah, right on. Well, thank you so much for your talk, and it's a lot. It's fun to like see the process that someone goes through when they're switching from WordPress, because it's something that you hear a lot of. So thank you for sharing your experience and things that you learned along the way, and yeah, and that you still love WordPress, and you're like, it's still like a great thing to use. But yeah, great information. If you want to ask Vincent more questions, or if you just want to say hi, you can find Vincent in the Slack community. Everyone's tagging you, so you can definitely find him there. But yeah, thank you so much, Vincent.
All right, thank you.
All right, so thank you so much to our external speakers for sharing all the stuff that they did. I do have a special surprise for those speakers. You will be getting a Sanity hoodie. So thank you for speaking. And if you ever want to speak at a meetup coming up, you can always find me in the Slack community as well. Let me know what subject you'd like to speak on, and we can get you speaking at a future one. We do love first-time speakers. And so if you've never spoken before, don't be nervous. I will help you along the way. You can find our chat at slack.sanity.io in the Meetup channel. So next, we have Hida, one of the DevRels at Sanity, one of my coworkers. We work a lot together, and also one of the people leading the ambassador program that I talked about earlier. So let's bring Hida on stage. Hi, Hida.
Hello.
All right, so where are you joining in from?
I'm joining from Rotterdam in the Netherlands.
Right on. And what time is it for you?
It is 8 p.m.
Nice. Not too late. Still late, but not too late. Okay, perfect. So everyone in the chat, we will have our Q&A after Hida. So if you have any questions, put it in the channel, and I will give you the stage. Thank you, Hida.
All right. Thanks so much, Kath. It's cool to be at this meetup, having joined a few times. Super happy to be on the stage talking to you about how to shift left. So like Kath said, I work with her together in the developer relations team at Sanity. I'm also an accessibility specialist. I've been spending a lot of my time on accessibility in the last decade, and most recently at the W3C working on some accessibility standard promotion. So you'll hear a bit about accessibility standards today too. And yeah, let's dive right into it. So accessibility, let's talk about what it is. Let's then talk about how you can apply it. And then, yeah, look a bit at kind of how you can do it earlier as well, because that's the subject of today's talk. So web accessibility is all about making sure that people with disabilities can use your website. And that means that they can do stuff on your website that everyone else does, like buy your product or use your service. It just kind of has to work for people. And people with disabilities is a broad group. Sometimes people think that accessibility is about a specific group, like blind people or people who are deaf. But it is a really wide range of different people. Counting 1 in 5 of people in the world fall under this umbrella. And there's a lot of different kind of people that have disabilities and that we want to improve the web for. So it could be neurological conditions, motor impairments, color blindness, all these sorts of things. And I think what's more important than the particular disability that they have is kind of how they use the web. So some people might be using Zoom on web pages all the time. They might be using high contrast modes or a screen reader. They might need their audio or video transcribed. Sometimes they just use a keyboard, not a mouse, or some other device. They might be using voice recognition or prefer reduced motion. So lots of different ways that people use computers. And basically, to do accessibility is to make sure that the the website or an app doesn't have barriers for those kinds of different ways of using computers. And basically that all comes down to assuming less about how people use your product. I remember when first phones with the web came out, and I was still building websites that fit exactly on a 800 by 600 screen, or maybe slightly bigger. And I had assumed that no one would be trying to do that on a phone. But then the iPhone came out, and boom, we had to kind of make sites that were responsive, and we could make less assumptions about widths. Now, accessibility is a lot like that, but in a lot of different facets, right? And I want to talk about sort of what to test, because this might sound a kind of abstract, like there are so many different ways to use a computer. How can we make sure that our stuff actually works for all these different ways? Now, what I usually recommend is to look at 3 different things. One is accessibility standards, 2 is best practices, and then there is user testing. So those 3 things kind of have to be used together in order to get a super accessible experience. I'll focus on accessibility standards first, and specifically the WCAG standard. Now, this standard is internationally implemented, which means that governments worldwide have adopted this standard. So when the US government or the European Commission, or most governments around the world really, ask you to make a website accessible, what they usually do is ask you to meet the WCAG standard. So that's great. That's one standard that we can use across the globe. You can read it in its original form, which is the URL displayed on this slide. And I will be sharing the slides out later, so you can access all the URLs that I mentioned here. You can also use this different version called Quick Reference, where you get a bit of a easier view on the document. It makes it a bit easier to filter and to look around the different parts of the standard. There are also some derivative standards, like thisiswcag.com, which tries to make a human readable form. Those documents are super helpful too if you want to try and understand the standard and get some more helpful examples. But note that they are not the official thing. So yeah, if you're trying to find out what you need to do exactly, you always want to refer back to the original, basically. Now, there's a lot to WCAG, different layers and different levels, but basically what it comes down to for most websites is that they meet 50 success criteria. So there are 50 things that are all about people who, or about issues that people with disabilities have with websites, like barriers that they might face. And they are testable, sometimes by humans, sometimes by machines. That's what they've all been designed like. So each of the 50 criteria will meet those criteria themselves. So yeah, accessibility standards, best practices, and user testing are what you'll need to do accessibility. And I'll not go into best practices and user testing today. I'll go straight to how to test this stuff. And many of you will have heard that you can do some of this automatically, but usually you'll need both. You'll need manual checks as well as automated checks. I'll give you one example. Like when you have an image that has 50% off, what you'll notice is that this needs to have an alt attribute that gives an alternative. So if I used a computer or machine to check whether it is accessible, it could throw an error because it could find that that attribute is missing. But when the attribute is there, but it has the wrong contents, like it says 25% off, then someone will get the wrong information about what the deal is, and maybe they decide not to purchase, or stuff could happen. But the alt attribute is there, and this is something that automated test will not catch for you. Not because we can't automate this. I mean, OCR has existed for a long time, so it would be possible in theory, but just most accessibility testing services don't do any OCR, right? So this is usually something that you will be checking manually. Now let's look at a bunch of different ways of doing manual testing, and then look at some ways to do it automatically. I'll go through these kind of quickly, and I'll be sharing the slides later, so you can refer to them later on as well. So one check you can do is for the page title. You want to check if there is a title in the first place, and then also if it describes the page. So if you were to close your eyes and someone would describe the page using the title element, does it give you enough information about what's on that page? Because that's what you're looking for there. Another one is keyboard. Can you get to all the interactive elements? And that's elements like links and buttons, form elements. You want to be able to get there with the tab key and then use a space or an enter key to actually activate it. So anything that you can click on with a mouse, you also want it to be usable with just the keyboard. Another question to ask with keyboard is, can I actually see where I am? So let's say I have some text with some links in them. When you press the tab key, it will usually draw an outline around the link that you're currently on. Now, some websites turn that off, and that's an actual criteria in WCAG. You want to make sure that there is some kind of visual outline so that it's visible which element currently has focus, because that means if you're using a keyboard and you're going to press your enter key, it means you're going to go to that link and not another one. So that's very essential information. Now, when it comes to images, you want to figure out if the image is the only thing inside of a link. And that is often the case when you have a header with like a logo that links back to the homepage, because the alternative text for that image will become the link name. You want to make sure that it has some information about where it's going. So in this case, it will go to the homepage. So you want to have the word homepage in the alternative text. That's something that you can check there, because it will become part of the link's name and get announced by screen readers. Then audio. So when you have audio, you also want to make it available as text. And that's something that Darice Takuba, a friend of mine, has described quite beautifully in her blog post about an experiment she's done with students. She's a really big podcast lover, but as she's deaf, a lot of the podcasts that she wants to access are actually inaccessible because they don't provide alternative text, like no transcripts, or it takes some weeks. So she's kind of behind the season from her friends, maybe, that she want to discuss them with. When it comes to headings, you want to check if they describe the section that they're heading off. And that's because a lot of people who use screen readers will navigate by heading. And you want to make sure they're actually marked up as headings as well in your HTML. We just saw a bit about Tailwind, and I won't give my opinions on Tailwind, but what often happens with Tailwind is that you can do everything with class names. So you could use a div instead of a heading element and get the same results visually. But in order for accessibility to work, you want an actual heading tag. Then when it comes to zoom, you want to zoom in like 400% and figure out, does everything still work? Like text shouldn't overlap, text shouldn't be cut off, all of the controls should be usable, and you don't want like horizontal and vertical scrolling at the same time. So that's a check that you can do like while you're developing and making sure none of your controls overlap, especially hard when you're doing like UI development. Another one is timing. So when you have anything that takes time, like a time limit of like an hour before you log someone out automatically, like in a banking application or something, you want to give them a chance to actually extend the time so that they have enough time to do the stuff they need to do. And that's especially important for people who are using different input methods that might take more time to use. For instance, if they're using a stick to control a keyboard rather than their fingers, or that sort of thing. Now let's look at a couple of ways to do semi-automated testing, so tests that you can run on your web page. And you can use Firefox DevTools for some of these. For instance, you can visualize the tabbing order with a checkbox in the accessibility tab. And that's really neat because that gives you an overview of what is tabbable on your page and also what the order is. So you want to make sure that the order kind of makes sense, that you don't go from the top to the bottom, back to the top all the time. So you want to have like a logical order there. Firefox DevTools also comes with contrast and keyboard text label checks, and you can simulate color deficiencies, which is really helpful. If you can see the difference between red and green, you can see what it will look like if you wouldn't, and figure out if your colors work the way they should. Another tool that I love using for accessibility testing is actually the HTML validator. Gone are the times that we would display like a HTML tag on our websites that shows like, hey, we're valid. But it's still super helpful to figure out if there are any kind of problems that could also trickle down into screen readers and stuff like that. Sometimes these are also built into your framework. Like in React, I think the tool will also complain when you do wrong nesting and stuff like that. Another tool you can use in a browser is the Wave plugin. It's going to give you a lot of accessibility checks and let you browse kind of what sort of headings you have and that sort of thing. So Wave is another tool that you can use on your website, semi-automated. And then there's stuff that you can run fully automated. And a lot of these can integrate with like your CI/CD, or you can like run it on a pull request, stuff like that. Now, examples are Axe, Tenon, and Siteimprove, but there are a bunch more. If you want to dive into that, I recommend this blog post by the UK government, because they've looked at a bunch of different automated tests and figured out like what they are testing and if they are catching the problems that they are describing, basically. Now, I promised to explain why it is easier if you do it earlier. And I think the main reason for that is that you can find barriers in your site before it deploys. And I think that is a really helpful thing, whether it's for yourself or for your clients that you're building a Sanity website for. It's usually quite expensive to find out about accessibility problems after a website launches. This is what I used to do when I did accessibility audits. I'd often be asked, our website is done, can you do an audit? But the problems I found would be kind of expensive to fix because they would have to get the team back together. Maybe they are already working on some new features and they kind of need to go back to some of the older stuff. It isn't very helpful. So if you can find problems earlier, that is helpful. It's easier when you do it earlier if you pick a CMS that supports accessibility, if you check your designs before building them, if you check your builds before merging them, and also if you check the merged code before shipping it. Lots of ways to do stuff earlier and to kind of bring the accessibility earlier on. Now, what does that look like in Sanity? Because we're at the Sanity meetup, right? Now, one of the things that Sanity does is that it has a WYSIWYM editor rather than WYSIWYG. We kind of do what you see is what you mean. So rather than saying I want a heading that is bold and uses this font, you basically say this is a heading, and then in the front end, someone can figure out what to render it as. And this is really important for accessibility because you want to use the right tags. I'll get into that a bit more in a minute. Another thing that you can kind of do with Sanity is have better color contrast when it comes to images that you're using by using the palette feature that the Image API offers. So I've been building this personal photo blogging thing where it shows photos of where I currently am. Like here is a photo of Rotterdam where I live. And you'll see that the header has the same color as the photo, or kind of the main color of the photo is in the header. You see the Panda one has got a red header, for instance. Now the way that I do that, and let's actually go to my vision tool and we'll look for the posts, find the alt attributes so you can know what they are. And then from the image, we'll grab the asset reference and then get the metadata from there. Now, inside of that, I have put a palette property that has the colors that belong to this photo. Now, this palette stuff is generated by Sanity, or tool that Sanity uses, and it's going to return you a bunch of different colors that you can use in the front end. Now, that's what I'm using for my headers to give them the same color, but it also comes with stuff like a title color that will be black or white, depending on what the background color is. And with that, you can figure out ways to, let's say you want to have enough contrast between your foreground and background, you can find colors that kind of do that. And I'm saying kind of because it can sometimes give you colors that don't have exactly the WCAG requirement for contrast. That has to do with how many colors are in your picture, because it uses the color data from your photo in order to generate that palette. So if you don't have a lot of colors, it's a little bit harder to generate that. But in many cases, it will give you the right color, and you can tweak that in your front end as well by like having a little bit of semi-transparency or stuff like that. Now, you probably have seen that last month we launched the developer preview for V3. Espin is going to talk about this a bit more in the next talk. But when we announced it, we said, make it yours, because one of the cool things about V3 is that it is even more customizable. And customizability is actually something I find really interesting for accessibility too. Because if you want Sanity as your CMS that lets you do accessibility earlier and make accessibility easier, then customization is actually really helpful. And one way that I've looked at that is by adding validation rules. Now, this is not something V3 specific, although I built it in V3. And yeah, I want to show you kind of what this looks like. So I have got a book review, and in the book review, I've got headings and lists, but the headings are not true headings because they're bold text, and the lists are basically separated by returns. And then I've got a link there that's called click here, which isn't super helpful link text. So to find problems like that, problems that I've made as a demo, I have added 3 validation tests that are going to find these problems for me. Now, the first one is to find the fake headings. So it's looking for bold text that is the only child of like a paragraph. That's usually a heading. So what we're going to warn is, hey, this looks like a heading, but it's bold text. Now, if you want to fix that, you just pick a heading from the list and you turn it into like an actual semantic heading. Now let's do the list one. So we're uncommenting that, and now it's going to flag that list that I've got there, because it's not a real list, right? It's just separated by returns. Now, if I turn that into a list with bullets, and that's bullets visually here, but we can display it any way we like, then we'll see that that actually gets applied. Well, let's change this heading as well so that it's a real heading. Now, the last problem we have there is this text, click here. That's not descriptive. We want something more descriptive like publisher's website. And the reason is that if you're using a screen reader, it's going to read out the names of the link, but not necessarily what's before it. So it says to buy it, click here, but you won't hear to buy it, then you just hear click here, and it's not helpful. So we want to change that into something else, like publisher's website, for instance. And when we do that, we see that it's no longer flagged as an error. So what I'm doing there is I'm looking at an array of different strings like click here, learn more, read more, those sorts of generic link text that we want to avoid. And then I just check if the link text is that or something better, and fire a warning. So yeah, these are just a couple of ways that you can use validation rules. There are basically just JavaScript functions that you run on the text that is inside of your portable text editor. And then you can help editors to get stuff right. And it's maybe a little annoying when you're an editor and you get these warnings all the time, but it's also something you get used to. I mean, I can empathize with it when I started using TypeScript and I get all the different errors because I wasn't aware of some of the stuff. And then suddenly I learned how it works, and yeah, I get less errors. So that's kind of the idea of that. Like when you do make mistakes, they are flagged, and that is helpful. I even make these kinds of mistakes myself when I'm working with text and not in auditor mode, basically, when I don't have my auditor hat on, and I imagine that's the same for everyone. Now, another example of where you can leverage Sanity is if you're building a multilingual website, like this website that I've built for a British band. So they are English from Bristol, UK, but they sing in Chinese. So their website is bilingual, and all of the content is on one page. So there's no language switch. You just get both of the languages. Now, what that looks like is that, because it's side by side, we're declaring in the HTML element have a lang attribute that says the whole content is in English. And then inside of the heading, for instance, we have some Chinese text, and we're marking that with another lang attribute that says this text is actually in Chinese. So we have a lang attribute on the body and another one on the span, or like any content you see here will be marked with a lang attribute. In this case, it's Chinese Taiwan because they perform a lot in Taiwan, and their Chinese is specific to the way it is used in Taiwan. So you're using a language tag to basically tag this content is in this language. And with these two lang attributes, we're actually covering two success criteria from WCAG, one for the whole document, which is the one in the HTML element, and another one where there is a change of language. Now, in portable text, we can do this with custom annotations. And that's something our awesome community member, Kitty Giordell, has done this week. They showed this in a blog post, so I won't be talking about it too much. You can check out their blog post, it's more clear. But basically, they've created a custom annotation which adds a language switch to their portable text editor. So you can select some text and say, I want this to be in this language, and then they render it as a span with that lang attribute available. Now, I love this. I think this kind of annotation-y things are really cool because they allow you to add that accessibility meta information that is needed because the accessibility guidelines say that it is needed, or some users can benefit from it, and this lets editors make those changes. So yeah, I think that's really cool, being able to customize in order to improve accessibility. All right, so we've looked at what accessibility is, how you can apply it with different tools, and when, preferably early with the right CMS with automated checks, often during your development and periodically as well with audits and user tests and stuff like that. All right, with that, I want to thank you very much. The slides are available on my website. I'll tweet them out probably or share them in the chat later on.
Awesome, and I'm not muted. I will leave this slide up for a little bit so you all can jot that down real quick. Thank you, Hida. What a great talk with a lot of information about accessibility. I know that this talk used to be longer, and so for you to be able to get all this information in 20 minutes, super great.
Yeah, I shared the links afterwards, so you can dive into some more because I've had to cut out some nuances here and there.
I didn't know about the manual zoom going up to 400%. That's actually something very interesting. So when they zoom into 400, is that like the minimum, or is it like where did that 400 come from? Like, does
It's
it?
basically a bit of a random amount. There's, I think,
Okay.
the standard says 200% for some stuff, and then some more. I use 400 because it often breaks some stuff, and it's useful to find out kind of where it's breaking. So I actually have a friend who is like visually impaired, and they use their phone on like 400%. So everything is really big. It's mostly annoying for them when they want to send a private text message, and they need to make sure people are staring at their screen. But
yeah.
on phones, this is kind of easy to do, but on websites, it often breaks stuff because some button might overlap with some other button, or some text might overlap with some other text. So yeah, I use 400% because it usually allows me to find all the problems, basically. And more is probably overdoing it. And some browsers also only go up to 400. So yeah.
Well, because I usually do like 1 to 200, like if I'm doing a demo and I need to zoom in or something like, but 400, I think that's probably something I'll strive for, like, especially when I'm sharing, but like try and get up higher. Cause yeah, you just don't think, but yeah, 400 is a great number to strive for. I learned something the other day when I said grok in one of my videos, that the captioning picked it up as grok, and so the person listening and reading the captioning didn't know what I was talking about, because when they Googled it, grok didn't come up with anything for Sanity because it spelled groq. And so I learned something. And so, like, if you ever have feedback for stuff that, like, content that's being created, the creator loves to hear this kind of stuff because it helps them improve their content. So it's just like little
Yeah,
things
it's
like
usually
that.
recommend like to spell out, but I don't always do it either. Like with WCAG, I will not say WCAG. I probably should, because it does help some people Googling afterwards, for sure.
Yeah. So there were a couple of questions while you were speaking. A lot of folks tend to think about accessibility in terms of permanent disabilities. Can you talk a little bit how thinking/caring about accessibility can help folks who have temporary disabilities or situations, and provide like universal clarity for that?
Yeah, so there are some organizations that will look at situational versus temporary versus permanent. Where situational is like you're holding a baby and you only have one hand available. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Like, that's
Yes.
hard. And suddenly you realize, like, oh, I can't reach that thing with my thumb only. So that's situational. Or you're in a bar and the sound of the music is really loud and it's harder to order something. It's easier to point at the written down menu or something like that. That's kind of situational. And then there's temporary too, where maybe I've cut my finger while I'm cooking, and my hand cannot use it for a bit, but I can use it like in 2 months. I might also experience what it's like to use just a keyboard or struggle with the mouse or stuff like that. Broken your arm is another kind of common one. If people go and do a skiing holiday or something and come home and temporarily can't use some parts of their body. So yeah, that's definitely widens the group too of people who benefit from accessible websites.
Yeah. You don't think about like the temporary and the situational kind of stuff. So yeah, all this like testing and like researching is good to have. Do the accessibility standards cover all disabilities currently?
They don't. So they kind of cover the ones that are easiest to turn into rules. And some of them are a lot harder to turn in rules. One is cognitive accessibility. When I worked at W3C, there's this working group that worked specifically on that, but it's really hard to take some of their work into rules because it's very personal. Like some of the problems are harder to kind of translate into rules that can be applied universally. So cognitive disabilities are one aspect that are a bit harder to put into the rules. A lot of the guidelines are about accessibility for people who are blind. And that is because that's kind of technical what you need to do there, because it corresponds to like the accessibility APIs and all that sort of thing. So it's a bit easier to turn into the guidelines or the success criteria that are in the standard.
I see. Cool. And we have another question from the community. How is your expertise in accessibility helping to improve Sanity?
Right. I am sometimes in meetings with some of the engineers who are working on cool new stuff to help with some of the accessibility things there. That is starting to happen. And yeah, there's lots of different parts where like I will get involved and kind of I'd give advice to colleagues. Because this is something I'm passionate about. So I share a lot of this stuff internally as well.
Yeah, and it's just the fact that it's brought up and it's talked about and you teach it and you talk about it that helps people every day. You may not be making major changes to the studio or to something, but now all the engineers or content creators, anyone that is using Sanity now gets to hear what you have to say and learn about 400% manual zoom or, the situational disabilities. But yeah, it's so good to hear about this stuff and be constantly reminded. This is definitely a talk that you can revisit in a couple months and get something else, or maybe you forgot about something. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
Thanks for having me.
So if any of you have any other questions for Hida, you can find Hida in the Slack community. And yeah, thank you so much. And we will see you around, Hida.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. So we have one more. Let me put that banner quickly on. So if you have joined late or you don't know where to go because the chat is not on YouTube, slack.sanity.io in #meetup. And we have our final speaker. It is going to be Espin. Espin is a principal engineer at Sanity and will be doing a demo for us for our V3. It is in developer preview right now, but we have a lot to show. So I will bring Espin on stage. Hi, Espin.
Hello.
Welcome. Thank you for doing this last minute. I think I asked you like less than a week ago.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing this.
Of course.
But yeah, you'll be speaking on V3 stuff, and I won't say much else because I'll let you just take it away. Oh,
All right.
where are you joining in from?
I'm joining from Oakland, California.
Oh, you're close to me.
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought you were in Europe right now. I know you travel a lot. So same time, 11:30 as me. Right on.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I will let you have the stage. Thank you, Espin.
Thanks. So hey everyone. I am Espin and I work on the Sanity Studio team. We had a meetup not too long ago where we showed off sort of the starting point for V3 and introduced the developer preview. And today I'll be speaking a little bit about custom input components in V3 specifically. So just to get everyone on the same page, input components are these ways of actually getting content into a field inside of Sanity. So they can be things like an image input, which lets you upload an image. It can be a portable text editor, which allows you to embed rich text and other content types. Or it can be a code block, or it can just be a string field like a title for a article. All kinds of stuff. There's very little limitations, and you can customize these, which is what makes Sanity kind of special, because you can make these super, super custom. So just briefly, the anatomy of an input component, there's a lot of things going on here which you might not think about usually. So there's the field title and the description. There is validation errors and warnings. there are field presence, which shows who's currently in that field or has that field focused. There is a change indicator, which shows whether or not a field has changed since it was last published. And then sort of the two different segments of this is that you have a field, which encompasses all of this. And then you have the input, which is just the actual green area here, which is the actual sort of input that you enter things into. And that's the distinction that we didn't have in Sanity v2 that we now have in v3, which makes some of these things a little bit easier. Because what you usually care about is customizing just that sort of input area. So with v3, our goal was to improve the developer experience of these by simplifying some common scenarios, like leaving the input component as is, but sort of decorate or provide additional functionality around it. Or to customize basically only the input and not the field, like the label and description. We also wanted to make sure that you have less code to write and maintained, and that we have a typed and documented API. And of course, just basically iterating on the APIs and making them simpler. And there's still improvements to be made here. So what I'll be showing today is sort of a first stepping stone, and then we'll work over time to make it even easier for you. Anyway, I'm going to show a bunch of code, and I'm not super brave. So I have prepared a little bit ahead of time, and I will go through it a little bit step by step instead of trying to live code it all. So on the left here, you can see a default Sanity Studio setup in v3. And on the right, you will see the actual Sanity Studio running in the browser for that. So this is just the movie database template that you can choose when you're initializing a project. And as you can see, I have chosen to use TypeScript for this project, which will allow me to get a little bit more help when I'm configuring and building these things. So first off, this is, as I said, just a plain old thing. You can see it's loaded the desk tool. I have a movie type that's being shown here. The schemas are looking very much just like what it did in version 2 of the studio. And today I want to take you through the process of creating an input component and showing you a little bit of about what's possible. There are sort of two different approaches to it. I'm going to go to the next step here, which you can see here that I have implemented a custom input component for the portable text field. But at this time, it's just showing some text. So I'm going to show you how that's done. So in the movie type here, you can specify which components to use for a particular field. This used to be, I believe it used to be component or input component as a property here, but we've now moved this so that it's components, and then it takes an input or a field or a preview and a couple of different things of that sort. And that's the easiest way to go about it. And so in this particular case, I have called this input JSON view, which is not very doesn't really show you what it's actually doing right now, because now it's just showing you some text. But as you can see, I've just placed this in a plugins and JSON view folder. There is no, there's nothing that says where you want or need to place these things in Sanity v3. You can place them anywhere you want. I've just decided to do it here because why not? And so, as you can see, I'm importing some components from Sanity UI and just rendering that just to get sort of React running on the screen. Yeah, so that's step one. Let's take a little step further. Now I'm using the code component from Sanity UI, and I'm rendering the actual JSON, which now makes a little bit more sense why it's called JSON view, right? So what I wanted to show here is that, first of all, we've added a type for the props that's coming in here. So that's TypeScript providing that. And the nice thing about that is that I can now do things like props, and I can see what all the different available options to me are on this level, which is really helpful when you're exploring Sanity and trying to figure out how it all ties together and what your options are. So in this case, I'm just stringifying the value. Like the value is an array in this case of objects, and I'm just putting that on the screen using Sanity UI. That's not super helpful, of course. First of all, it's not a actual input. So I'll be going a little bit deeper on this over the course of this demo, and then I'll show you how to actually make it into an input at some point. Don't worry. But I wanted to show just how easy it is to actually do stuff now with Sanity UI and the new V3 APIs. It's kind of fun to explore. So if we go to the next step here, oops. You can see that I have replaced the input props with a more specific type. So as you saw, I was implementing this for the specific like portable text field, and because I know it's going to be a portable text field, I can now instead say that the properties are going to be a portable text props, which will just make it a slightly more understandable for the editor what options are available. I've also added a switch here so that it's not always JSON. I can switch back and forth between that. It's just using React setState hook and just toggling between those. And a bit more like Sanity UI code here to actually render that to the right here. And it's just like toggling it. It's pretty standard stuff. And a conditional thing. And then I'm importing the portable text input from Sanity form and rendering it on screen. So this is already like kind of helpful for a developer, just as an additional feature, not necessarily as like something that is going to revolutionize your sort of editing experience, but it's kind of fun and helpful as a developer. Like you can, of course, use our inspect feature, but this is going to give you all the fields, and it's sometimes a little bit hard to sort of, which field is it? Oh yeah, it's the overview field, and navigate this thing. So I feel like this is pretty nice. So I want to take this one step further and use some of the new stuff that's available in V3. So for this project, I have a few available roles defined. So that's a feature that's available if you have some pricing plan. I'm not sure if it's our business plan or enterprise or something else. So I've actually defined a specific role which is called developer, but you have access to other roles, just by default, like the edit role or editor role. And so what I'm doing here is I'm getting the current user using the use current user hook. That's going to provide me either with a current user or null. It will be null in the case where it's loading. No, actually it won't. It's if you're anonymous. If for some reason you're embedding this into a context where you're currently not logged in, or you don't have a user. And so I have the user, and that user has some roles, and then I'm going through those and looking for a role that is developer. So if I am a developer, then I'm going to show this toggle. And if not, then I'm just going to render the input as usual. And just to prove that this actually works, I can change this from developer to like dog. If my role is a dog, then I'm going to render it. And as you can see, it's no longer there. And you can also see the super fast reloading that's powering V3 now with Vite, which is running under the hood. So that's super nice as well, because it's just super nice to develop on. That's helpful. This sort of helps us because we can now put this into production and not have to worry about people who don't know what JSON is sort of toggling this and being confused by it. So I want to take this even further. I've now sort of removed it from the scheme. I've no longer exported the JSON view prop, or sorry, the component, and I've removed it from the schema here, so it's no longer saying that it should be rendering this input component. Instead, I want to build a plugin, and that's sort of I want to make this into a generic thing that you can ship to other users or other projects that you're using. And it also allows me to do a little bit more because it has a bigger sort of surface area of customizability. So I've defined a plugin. I've used the create plugin API that's available in Sanity. And you can see I've given it a name called JSON view. So basically, this is doing nothing at the moment. And I've added it to the plugins array here, JSON view there. And what this now lets me do is a bunch of things. So if I open the autocomplete here, you can see that TypeScript is providing me with all of the available options here. And I'm going to be using one of these in particular. If I go to the next step of this. I'm implementing a thing called render input. And what this is doing is basically telling Sanity how it should be rendering input fields. And one thing of note here is that even a document is an input, which might be a little bit confusing. But if I remove this check here, then you can see that the whole thing will just be rendering input. So what I can do is explicitly check whether or not the schema type that is being rendered for this input is a document type. You can see that I'm doing schema type.type here, which is kind of confusing. That just means that the schema type is, for instance, movie. So if I check schema type.name, that will be movie. So I need to actually go one step up and see what the parent type of that document is. Which is going to be document. We're going to be providing some cool little like helper functions for a bunch of these things at some point, like is document type, but that's currently not available. So what I'm doing here is basically saying if it's a document, then I want to just like do the default thing. So as you can see, it's getting props, which are the inputs, the properties that the input gets, and then you get a next function, which is kind of similar to a middleware in something like Express.js. So you can call next with props, and then it'll just do the default thing. So now you can see that every field here is then just rendering this thing. So one step further. Now I've adjusted this JSON view sort of function to be agnostic. So it doesn't just work for input or like portable text inputs. It's usable for any input type. And I've also extended it so the properties here take the regular input props, and it's also going to take children, like React children, as you might be familiar with, just like React components can take children. And I'm now passing down sort of the default here. So as I said, the next function, if you call it, is just going to render the default input. So I'm saying I want to render the instead of rendering like the portable text input as I did previously, I'm just going to render whatever it is that is the default. So that allows me to do this thing where I don't have to go into the schema and define like an input component for every single field that I want this on. I can just plop this in, and you can see that it works on any type. So if it's a string, it'll just show it as like JSON as a stringified thing. It works on the object level, or it can work even on like sub fields for that document. So that's pretty cool. And but I want to take it even further. This is a bit noisy with all of these like switches everywhere. So I can do things like I can use the isObjectSchemaType function, which is also exported from Sanity, to check that if it's a object type, then I don't want to render the JSON input, and that that means that I don't get these like double toggles here, for instance. That's one thing you could do. Makes it a little bit more readable. But you can also do things like one of the things that I really wanted to do was to be able to just sort of hover over a field and then be able to toggle it with a keyboard shortcut. So I don't have to go all the way over here and do that. So just to get some fundamentals up and running here, I've wrapped the input with some on mouse over and on mouse out functions. I'm sure there's better ways of doing this, of course. This is more like quick and dirty demo code. But as you can see, I've just hooked it up to the switch just to show that it actually works. So when I hover a field, you can see the switch actually changing. And that's the first step that I need, because I want to know if my mouse is like over that field. And given our last talk, this isn't very accessible because it's just using the mouse, which isn't great, but it's a first step. So now I'm going to add some shortcut listeners. So I want to be able to click or press Control-I or Meta-I on Mac to be able to inspect. So I've added this key down listener, which is going to check whether or not I'm hovering that field. And I'm going to check if I'm pressing the Control or Meta key at the same time as I'm pressing the I key. And if that happens, then I'm going to be toggling the show JSON, and I'm adding this using a use effect. So I'm listening to the entire window here for that key press. And then when it's this component is unmounted, then I'm removing that event listener. There's better ways of doing this as well, because now it's going to be adding like a whole bunch of event listeners instead of just one, but it'll work, and it's just a fun little demo. So when I now press that keyboard shortcut, you can see that it actually toggles between these states, and that's pretty nice. And that already provides me with some value, I feel like. Makes my life a little bit easier. And I could even do things like now check, I could even remove this toggle altogether if I wanted to and just have the keyboard shortcuts, but that is not very accessible. Like the good thing is that I can now at least tab through these and toggle with my keyboard. The next step here is allowing the keyboard shortcut even for non-developers. So this is something that I've been wanting to have, because sometimes when you want to help someone out and they're not a developer, it can be kind of annoying when you're looking over their shoulder and trying to understand why a document is not giving you the result that it is that you're expecting. It would be nice to be able to sort of inspect the JSON. But if they're not a developer, then you don't have that feature. That's the way it's coded right now, at least. But what I'm doing now is that I'm checking if the user is a developer or I'm showing the JSON. Then I'm going to do this thing. So if I change this to like some other thing where that's not going to trigger, then I'm not now saying I'm not a developer. But I can still use that keyboard shortcut to toggle. That's pretty cool. And if I take it one step further, it's very noisy with all of these switches. So I might just want like one big switch on the top of the document. So I'm going to show you a few things that allows you to do that. So first of all, I've wrapped the entire document in this new component called document with JSON view control. And again, this is just React. So I'm checking if it's a document type, and then I'm rendering that. I've sort of moved most of the logic up here to that sort of component. And then what I'm doing is when I'm rendering the children of that document, which is all of these fields, I'm going to wrap that in a new context provider. So some of you might be familiar with React Context, but it's basically an API that allows you to sort of wrap an entire subtree inside of React and get that value, the value of that context from anywhere in that tree. So I'm just going to give it a default value of false, like that JSON view context is basically just whether or not to show JSON. And then I'm going to say, yeah, the value is show JSON. So that when I toggle this, it's going to switch the entire context value. And then all of the other inputs are going to be wrapped in just this logic here. So I'm getting the context from using the use context, and that value will be whether or not to show it. And if we're showing it, then I'm rendering the JSON, and if not, then I'm just rendering the input. And this creates like a pretty readable and easy to understand thing. I can see that for some reason, this is because this is a object type. That's interesting. So we could improve the switch probably, but because it's an object type, it's not rendering the value right now. There we go. Now it does the same for that. So what we could do is things like if it's an object type and the props.level is 1, I think, or it might be 0. So if we now switch, yeah. Oh, so level is 0 maybe? Wow. Probably shouldn't live code. This is the reason why you don't do live coding. So what is the keyboard shortcuts? There we go. Yeah, there we go. So if the level is 0, so basically if it's a root level field, then I don't want to show it, or don't want to use it. Anyway, that's that. I want to take it one step further because I can always take it further, right? And I've got to update my notes here, but basically I'm now showing, am I showing? Oh, I've removed that entire component. Oh, right, I wanted to show an actual input. I'm sorry. This was thrown together at the last minute, so I'm sorry for the sort of rant here. So what I'm done now is I'm going back to just to show you that you can actually make inputs as well. You can make changes to things. That's kind of a key feature, obviously. I've created a new plugin here called More Cocos. Cocos is my dog, which I love dearly. And then what that's going to do is it's going to render this text field here, but it's also going to give me a More Cocos button. So if you take a look at and when you click that button, it's just going to insert some love for Cocos because we all need that in our lives, and it's also going to count how many hearts you have given Cocos. So to see how that works, I have an input here. Let me hide that. Which takes a string input props. So we know that it is a string, but the value of that can be undefined because if you don't have any content in this field, then it will be removed from that document altogether. So we're defaulting it to just an empty string just to make it easier to render. So it's basically just rendering the default component here by using again, we're passing down like the default input. And we're saying that we also want a button with an icon that has more cocos in it. And when you click it, it should be calling this function. And you can see here that we've simplified the API for this change. Well, if you're familiar with the API of the input components from V2, it's slightly easier now. You have these, still have these set and unset and insert operations available. We might simplify this even further in the future, but this is what it's like right now. So I'm just saying I want to set this field to the value plus cocos. And then I want to render this text underneath. So that's just a super basic example. I could probably make a lot more, I guess, non-trivial examples of how to use input components. But I'm going to show you like the full scale version of that, I guess you could call it. So going back to the JSON view example, like if we wanted to make like a super custom thing, then we could add an option to this plugin, which allows you to edit. So if you take a look at the JSON view plugin here, I now am providing it with options, which is of type JSON view options or void, which means you can choose to not pass it at all. And this options takes an allow editing boolean. So if I go back to the, not schemas, but the config, then you can see I'm now passing it options here. So this is a change from V2 where all the configuration was in like a config folder. Now you can just do this in TypeScript or JavaScript, which allows you to do lots of things like use environment variables or anything you might want. So basically that's the first step. And then I'm also using a text area instead of code if the allow editing option is true. So when I'm doing this, you can see that these are now just like text areas. That's not actually hooked up anywhere. It's just basically rendering a text area. And I'm saying just style it as a monospace thing because it's code, which is not doing anything. So let's take that to the next level and actually implement some editing. So what we need for that is to be able to have sort of a separate edit state, because you need to be able to write into the JSON like this field without it being valid JSON, I guess. You should be able to like just write stuff, and if it's valid JSON, then we want to actually send a patch to change it. This is not something that I recommend doing, and it's very scary and dangerous because you can do things that are not compatible with the schema at all. But there are cases where it would be nice to be able to just edit the JSON in the studio manually. So basically what I'm doing is I've hooked up a change handler to that text area, and I'm saying I want to get the value of it. Then I want to set that value to a new state called edit state. That's just using like React. And then I'm checking if that value is empty. And if it's empty, then I'm just unsetting the entire field. So instead of having like an empty string or anything of that sort, I'm just going to remove the entire field if it's empty. And then I want to try to parse the value if it has content as JSON. And then I can just quickly show that. It's basically just calling JSON parse. And if it's an error, then I want to, instead of throwing, I just want to provide a like static constant called invalid value to be able to pick that up more easily. So if it's a valid value, then I am firing off a set for the entire field with the parsed value of that thing. So I can show you that that actually works now, but with oops. If I open a new tab, or a window, I've got two editing sessions here, and one of them is JSON and one of them is not using JSON. So I want to edit this text here, wall E. So I can edit this, and you can see that the editor on the left is reflecting these changes. It's a little bit slow because it actually sends these patches to the server and then distributes that to all the clients. So it's not like local. But as you can see, it actually works. It is sending and editing JSON. Great. Oops. I think that's pretty cool. We can take it even further. We can add, this is the last thing, I promise you. If we want to take it really further, we can actually add something like Code Mirror, which allows you to have like a more proper editing experience within the studio for JSON. So again, I can change the text here. Holy. And then if I go back, or I can even change the title, you can see it reflect in real time. So that's all I wanted to show today. It's a very contrived example that's using JSON, which you probably maybe don't want to do, but I'll probably make some more demos with real world examples in the future. And I hope that was somewhat helpful. Thanks.
Very helpful, very cool. And I love we can take it a step further, and you just kept adding more and more to it. It's cool how far you can take that.
Yeah, it is. It's been a lot of fun to play around with, and it's just crazy the options that you have available now.
Yeah. There were a couple questions. So I think it was Hida that asked us at the very beginning, but you mentioned you chose TypeScript for this component. Why did you use TypeScript instead of JavaScript?
Right. So first of all, I just like TypeScript now. I hated it in the beginning, but once you get used to it, it is kind of nice just to have more. The editor sort of gives you a lot more help when you're doing things that you don't want to do, and when you're exploring someone else's API, I imagine it can be very helpful that it's giving you like, you can't pass that value to that thing because it's not what you expect it to be.
Yeah.
But it also gives a slightly better editor integration, even though you can use JavaScript and import, and it'll probably give you the same amount, like almost the same amount of help with what's available at the very least.
That makes sense. Do you know when V3 is going to be launched? I know it's in developer preview right now, but do you have an idea?
I don't want to promise anything, but probably a few more months. We're still gathering feedback, so please give it a try and give us all the feedback that you can, because it always helps, and we're trying to simplify things as much as possible. So we appreciate any feedback, even if it's been a bit of a month with a lot of vacation days, so we haven't been as responsive as we would have wanted to, but we promise it'll get better. Yeah.
Speaking of feedback, I actually put in the GitHub discussions link into the Meetup channel. So if you have feedback or want to talk to us about V3, head there. And thanks for doing this last minute. That was a lot of info, and I really liked the JSON editing the JSON in the studio.
Yeah. It's useful sometimes, for sure.
Yeah. Right on. Well, thank you so much, Espin. And if any of you have questions for Espin after this, you can always find him in the Slack community.
Yep.
But yeah, thank you so much, and we will see you around.
Thank you. See ya.
All right. So great meetup. Thank you everyone for speaking. Thank you to our internal and our external speakers. We do have a meetup next month, at the end of next month. Final date is not decided yet, but you can either follow us on Twitter or you can be a part of the meetup group. And when I put it there, then you'll be the first to know because it like sends out an email. And then a couple like little things to just remind you, the ambassador program, if you know of anyone or if you are interested, email devrel@sanity.io or talk directly to Lo or Hida, and they will be able to help you get your application in. All right, so I know that was a lot of information, but thank you so much for hanging out from beginning to end or whenever you joined, however long you could watch. We loved having you here. And we will see you in the Slack community. And we're always there to help. Say hi. Say hi in the introductions channel. And if you need help getting started, there's the getting started channel. Or if you need further help, there's the help channel. Yeah, so I will see you next month at our August meetup. And thank you so much for joining, everyone. We'll see you in cyberspace. Bye.